Okay, so we're going to go through the first objection to logical positivism today, or at least the first influential one. Let's recap what the logical positivist believes and what they were committed to, and then we'll talk about how this objection poses like a fairly significant problem for them. So, as we said in class, right, the key commitments of the logical positivist are the analytic synthetic distinction and then a verifiable theory of meaning. The analytic synthetic distinction again is that there's two types of meaningful sentences and only two types of meaningful sentences, right? So there's sentences that are analytic and then there's sentences that are synthetic. If you can't formulate an idea or a sentence as an analytic or a synthetic truth for the logical positivist, then it's confused or meaningless nonsense, right? It's either the type of thing that sounds like you're saying something that has content or that sounds like something that's meaningful, but in fact it's not, says the logic positivist, right? Because you can't clarify your concept enough to be the kind of thing that could be either true or false. So examples they had in mind were things like the nothing nothings, um, or yeah, the nothing nothing is a good example, right? That's from Heidegger, right? And that sounds like you're saying something, right? It's saying there's this feature, there's this thing that nothing does, right? Nothing's a thing, and then nothing does something, it nothings. So it sounds like that should mean something. But what the logic positivist is trying to say is a sentence like that is neither analytic nor synthetic. So it ends up being the kind of sentence that's just incoherent. And a lot of what passes for philosophy or thought in general, says the logical positivist, is exactly that kind of a phrase. It's a sentence that sounds like it means something, but at the end of the day, it's empty or incoherent or meaningless or confused, right? In class, we talked about the example God exists, right? And, an argument from a positivist perspective against the existence of God, saying there's not this object that you are clear enough on that you can refer to when you say God exists. And so you're making a statement where we're just not really clear what you're talking about, said the logical positivist, right? That kind of claim. Analytic sentences are sentences that are true by definition. If you understand the words being used, you know, just given the concepts involved, that they are true or false, right? Bachelors are unmarried. 2 plus 2 equals 4, 5 plus 7 equals 12, right? Those kind of claims. If you know what the words mean, right, and how they're operating in the sentence, you just know that that sentence is necessarily true or necessarily false, right? They're analytic, right? Bachelors are unmarried. Again, if you know what a bachelor is, right? If you know what that word means, if you know what the word unmarried is, you know that those two concepts overlap, right? Um, the set of things that are unmarried includes bachelors, right? That's the idea. A lot of truths are like that. They're the types of things that, if we clarify our language and we just talk about the relationship between concepts, we'll know some of them are true, some of them are false. These types of truths, says the logical positivist, are empty in the sense that they don't have any real world implications. They are truths about the way we use language. Those are important, but they don't apply to, or they don't line up with, they don't make any claims about the way reality itself is independent of us. Then there's a second kind of truth, which they call a synthetic truth. A synthetic truth is a statement that is true or false based on how the world is. So water is H2O is classic example of this. All bachelors are bald would be, another example. I use Jason Steffen eats puppies for fun as an example in class, right? These are all sentences where you can't know they're true or false just by hearing the words, right? Or just by understanding the concepts. Water is H2O, right? We didn't know that just by thinking about the concept of water. We had to take the liquid that we call water and then we had to go analyze it, right? We had to go look at the world. We found out that the thing we are calling water always has the composition of being H2O, right? And so that there's a synthetic truth. If somebody had said water is H3O or something like that, right? They'd be saying something that's false because the chemical that we're looking at, the liquid we're looking at, has a different chemical composition. So there's the idea. No, what the logical positivist said is essentially what science is doing, right? Is there's this kind of role for philosophy, and then there's the role for the scientist, right? Philosophy is basically a handmaid into the sciences. What the philosopher needs to do is when we get a bunch of concepts, they need to clarify what we're talking about, right? And sort of sort them into analytic and synthetic truths. The analytic truths, we can just figure out whether or not they're true or false just by talking about them and arguing about them and just clarifying the language. And then we'll find out some of these are true, some of them are false. But the synthetic ones, we need to then pass them off to the scientist, and the scientist will go run a bunch of experiments and tell us which ones are true and false. And that leads us to an ever increasing set of knowledge about the world. And for the logical positivist, that's really all there is to the scientific and endeavor, right? And the pursuit of truth. There's nothing outside of that. There's a lot of things that we'll say or do, but they end up being neither analytic nor synthetic. So they're just sort of, at least as far as the pursuit of truth goes, just making noise. They might be creating great art or something like that, but that's not in pursuit of truth for the logical positivist. So that was roughly the view, right? The other part of it is they have what we call a verification theory of meaning. What that means is a sentence, when a sentence is not analytic, the meaning of that sentence consists in how we verify it, right? So analytic truths are sentences where just in virtue of the definitions are true or false, right? And so they mean exactly how our concepts are related to each other, essentially. That's a bad way to say it. For a synthetic truth, the meaning of that sentence comes from how we would verify it is true. So a sentence like water is H2O, the verification condition for that sentence, right, is the liquid that we call water has a chemical composition of being H2O, right? We verify the sentence by that observation, right? So the sentence is simply means if you looked at this liquid, it would have the following composition, right? Jason Steffen eats puppies for fun, right? The method of verifying that sentence is an observation of him having fun eating a puppy. So, I mean, the way you verify that sentence is you just put a camera on and you watch him, for 24 hours, and you'll see that that sentence is true, right? That's sort of all the sentence is saying. That's what it means. If a sentence doesn't have a method of verification, like the nothing nothings, make America great, America is great, it doesn't mean anything. It is literally nonsense for the logical positivist, right? It sounds like it means something, right? When we say axe the tax, I mean, that's a bad one. When we say a lot of political slogans, elbows up, I guess, is an example, right? That sounds like it means something, right? And we all get a sense. We all interpret that sentence differently, right? We think it has something to do with Canadian pride, right? And so we interpret that sentence as whatever we think it means to be a Canadian that's standing up and fighting for Canada. But there's not any one thing that verifies that sentence. There's not even a clear, the statement's not clear enough to be meaningful in the sense that it's not actually stating this about Canada, right? Like there would need to be clarification of the sentence saying you ought to do this for this and this reason or something. There should be a whole bunch added to that sentence in order to make it to the type of thing that we can observe something in the world that would verify the truth of it. For some people, moral claims in general are going to be the kind of thing where you're like, I'm not even really clear what it would mean to verify an ought, but that's going to be beyond this course. One of the reasons we keep to really simple examples is because the second we start talking about something complicated, it just gets messier. But elbows up as an example of a meaningless sentence, right? It's referring to something, like you feel like it's referring to something. It's telling you to do something for some reason. But looking at the sentence expressed, it's not clear what you're supposed to do, why you're supposed to do it. Yeah, what or why, right? So there's nothing you can look at and go, oh, there it is. There's the observation that verifies that. It's also not analytic, right? It's not, elbows up is not true by definition. So it's the kind of sentence for the logical positivist that just is nonsense, right? It doesn't mean anything, but it sure feels like it does. So again, they have a sparse metaphysics. They want to cut all that kind of stuff out and say much of the stuff we do with language is just nonsensical, or it's bullshit, or it's meaningless. So throw that stuff away. And then we get these two types of things: the analytic truths, just true by definition; the synthetic truths, they predict an observation or they tell us an observation. They are meaningful because they say something will be the case. And we can now verify those sentences. We can tell whether or not they're true or false by looking and finding out if that thing is the case. That's the work of scientists. The work of philosophers to be the handmaiden, try to sort out all the elbows up sentences and throw them out, and then keep the bachelors are unmarried sentences and the water is H2O sentences, right? Essentially, that's the knowledge project for the logical positivist. So that's what they're on about. Now, what's wrong with the view, or what are the major objections? The two really influential objections we want to look at is Quine's holism, which I'm going to end with in a second video, and then just the problem with the verification condition, right? So logical positivists said there's two and only two types of meaningful sentences, right? There's analytic truths and synthetic truths. Analytic truths are true by definition. If you know what the words mean, then you know the sentence is true or false. The verification condition, right? The meaning of a sentence is its conditions for verification. That's not an analytic truth, right? There's nothing about that sentence, the verification conditions for a sentence are its meaning, right? Like nothing about that is analytic. You cannot know that sentence is true or false by definition. So it can't be analytic. So then it's got to be a synthetic truth, right? Synthetic truths are sentences that are true on the basis, they're meaningful on the basis of the verification conditions, and their verification conditions are going to tell us whether or not they're true or false, right? So there's an observation in the world that we do that will verify the truth or the falsity of the sentence. So if we think about that verification condition, the meaning of a sentence is its verification conditions. What is the verification condition for that sentence itself? And it's really unclear what that would be. Logical positivists spent a lot of time trying to give sort of a formal account of what the verification condition was. And not even arguably, but I mean, let's just say arguably, none of those were successful, right? It doesn't look like the verification condition is a synthetic truth either. And then that's a huge problem for a logical positivist, right? Because they said only two types of sentences can be true: analytic sentences or synthetic sentences. And if it's not one of those, it's gobbledygook, right? Well, it looks like the verification condition itself is nonsense. And if that is nonsense, then the foundation of logical positivism is itself nonsensical, right? So the view is not even false. It's just incoherent in that sense. So it's sure looks like it's self-defeating. And that's a huge problem for the view, right? So there's classic problem one that the logical positivists had to deal with is if they can't give an account of the verification condition that's analytic or synthetic, then it looks like their view is internally incoherent and, fails. So problem one, talk to you soon.